It's always a case of fit for purpose, right, or what we call appropriate engineering. I think for high power AI workload, then I think going with liquid cooling, I think it's almost becoming the standard solution, right? But then not to forget, right, you also have storage, you have networking equipment. So these are actually typically the lower power.
Hello everyone, welcome to Green I/O. I'm Gael Duez, and in this podcast we empower responsible technologists to build a greener digital world, one bite at a time. Twice a month, on a Tuesday, our guests from across the globe share insights, tools, and alternative approaches, enabling people within the tech sector and beyond to boost digital sustainability. And because accessible and transparent information is in the DNA of Green I/O, all the references mentioned in this episode, as well as the full transcript, are in the show notes. You can find these notes on your favorite podcast platform and, of course, on our website, greenio.tech. One last thing. This episode is a bit special because it was recorded live from Green I/O Singapore 2 weeks ago. The sound quality isn't as good as you have been used to, but the quality of the guests is as good as ever. Enjoy the episode.
We're live and we're doing this fire chat session at Green I/O Singapore, second edition, and we're trying something new, which is recording live with all the technical hiccups that happened for the last 20 minutes. So my dear listeners, you didn't experience them, but the participants, they did. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Professor P.S. Lee and Professor Heng Wang to discuss the environmental footprint of AI, but for a very hands-on perspective based on the city-state of Singapore, because both of them are experts. Professor P.S. Lee from an infrastructure perspective, Professor Heng from a governance perspective. So how does this rise in energy consumption, resource consumption caused by the AI boom is concretely impacting the infrastructure of Singapore and the way Singapore governs its digitalization? So without further notice, I would love to leave the ground to Professor Lee and Professor Heng Wang. Can you please briefly introduce yourself, Professor Lee?
First, thanks for having me. I'm Heng or P.S. Lee from both Energy Studies Institute as well as Mechanical Engineering from the National University of Singapore. So my personal research centers around data center liquid cooling. So I've been working on this for the past 25 years. So liquid cooling is not new, but associated with the demand for AI. So it now becomes almost as a part of the requirement, right, in order to sort of unleash the AI performance. But I think more importantly is actually the switch from conventional air cooling to liquid cooling. It can actually result in very significant energy savings, right, as well as carbon footprint reduction. So I think that to me is actually the more important question, right? How do we actually take advantage of various technology so as to manage the carbon footprint of the industry, so that we can allow the growth in the most sustainable fashion.
Okay, thanks a lot. Professor Wang?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Singapore Management University, Newport House School of Law, and before that I was a professor at the University of South Wales in Sydney. I work on the governance of digitalization and sustainability. So the issue is about how do we align digitalization with sustainability, and one of these core issues about how do we navigate through the uncertainties, because we are not necessarily have all the knowledge about that. How do we use the regulation governance, different tools to align these two together? Yeah, and also I contribute to World Economic Forum, AI Governance Alliance, from the perspective of responsible use of AI. Thank you.
It's quite a lot to deal with. So without further notice, let's jump right into the main question. What is, according to both of you, the main issues, the main pitfalls with this current AI boom in your fields of expertise?
I think for the infrastructure side, I think the industry have been operating air-based system for the longest time, in the past 3-4 decades. So while liquid cooling is not new, I think in general the industry does not actually have a lot of practitioners that are familiar with the design as well as the operations of liquid cooled infrastructure. So I think there will be a period whereby there's quite a bit of learning as well as training that is actually necessary, so that we actually equip the industry practitioner with the necessary know-how as well as tools to sort of design and operate the liquid cooling infrastructure. Then obviously one of the natural questions is actually, what about the CapEx implication, right? Because again, the switching from liquid cooling to air cooling, the demand, while it's picking up, is certainly not at the same volume as air-based system, right? So that's why there's still the perceived delta in terms of the CapEx, right? Then I think even the more challenging is actually existing infrastructure, right? How do you actually allow wind retrofit of your existing data centers, right, in a cost-effective fashion? So I think these are some of the issues. The other is actually standards. I think currently there's a lack of standards. While there have been various guidelines, right, for example, from ASHRAE, from OCP, but I think there isn't a very well-established standards when it comes to the new AI infrastructure. So I think it really needs to be a power tracking of both the technology development, as well as the governance, including the standards.
I think I totally agree with what you have just said. Standards one issue. From governance perspective, or from knowledge perspective, I think we have a number of major issues. First, about knowledge. So if you use AI is fast developing. We have an issue about we have a imperfect knowledge about AI, kind of beta version. And secondly, we do not have complete knowledge, because you mentioned about cooling, you mentioned about energy transition, e-waste, and different contexts, finance and other sectors. So you have silos. Knowledge are not really distributed as much as we want. Thirdly, it's also been an issue about unpredictability. So the social response to AI is another issue. If you think about AI will compete with your drinking water, so the feedback to that will be different. So that's the knowledge side. Imperfect knowledge, incomplete knowledge, unpredictability. From governance perspective, we have mismatches. Mismatches about one is about, if you look at say horizontally, your short-term and long-term consideration. Short-term, you want to roll out fast. You also have a bottom decision. I want to have the use cases. Long-term, you have a sustainability. And also you look at the governance levels. You have a domestic one, subnational one, jurisdictional one, to international one, which has been pretty tricky nowadays. And also, if you look at the issue of the silos which earlier, you also have to break that. So that and come back to the issue: how do we build the knowledge, and how do we engage with stakeholders at different levels, and to forward the standard, and also to evolve over time.
Two questions to deep dive a bit on what you say. First of all, Professor Lee, it seems to me that you made the assumption that liquid cooling was the de facto solution to solve maybe partially the energy crisis caused by AI. But is it the only one? I mean, if you take a step back and you position yourself as like the almighty father of Singapore, or Singapore as infrastructure, would you say, okay, we need to go all into liquid cooling, retrofit everything like this, or is there different ways, different approaches that we should follow?
It's always a case of fit for purpose, right, or what we call appropriate engineering. I think for high power AI workload, then I think going with liquid cooling, I think it's almost becoming the standard solution, right? But then not to forget, right, you also have storage, you have networking equipment. So these are actually typically the lower power, right? So you don't really mix to go to liquid cooling. But even AI, if you look at, for example, training versus inferencing, right? Especially the later inferencing, you probably don't really require the super high power chips, right? So in that regard, right, you can probably go with some of the air-based solutions, but maybe going from the conventional, what we call the perimeter cooling, right, involving craft to a role-based solution like in-row coolers or rear door exchanger, right, which allows you to cool higher airflow rate, right, across such AI inferencing hardware. So I think it's always a case of fit for purpose.
And in the case of, just for the listeners who are not super familiar with the wording, AB is air-based cooling. Okay. Yeah. For a city like Singapore, did you manage to estimate the share of the current structure that should be sort of retrofit toward liquid cooling and the share that should go as it is today?
So I think Singapore is actually the quite unique, right? Because we have a moratorium about 3 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Because back then, data center industry is really consuming 7% of our electricity demand. Obviously, it's actually
7%.
yeah. So it's actually huge, right?
Yeah.
The government actually have its net zero commitment, right? And obviously, it's also concerned about the energy, the demand. So that's why a moratorium was actually put in place, which was actually finally released, right? Thereafter, we actually have a data center call for applications. But if you look at the licenses that were actually awarded, right, they are just averaging about 20 megawatt. So I think for a mature data center market like Singapore, right, the reality or the fact is you have a bigger stock of existing data center, right? Or you can call it legacy or brownfield data center. So I think the solutions that we should be looking at, right, whether or not you do liquid cooling or more efficient air-based solutions, will be actually quite different compared to, for example, Malaysia, in particular, like Johor Bahru, right? Because there's a lot of new data centers that are coming online. So for them, I suppose right from day one, they can actually start by designing or incorporating liquid cooling into the infrastructure. But for a mature market like Singapore, I think likely we'll have to do it in phases, right? Without undue interruptions to ongoing operation, as well as undue the delta in terms of the capex. Yeah, but I feel that for mature data center market like Singapore, the green retrofit data center, in fact, will be a lot more needle moving, right, in terms of bringing down the carbon footprint compared to emerging markets like Malaysia.
That's interesting, the connection with the governance issue when you mentioned the moratorium that happened 3 years ago. I mean, what is today, in your view, Professor Wang, the balance? You mentioned like short term, long term. How do you believe that Singapore should position itself in this fast rhythm regarding AI adoption and even like investment in new infrastructure, retrofitting infrastructure and the like?
I think it's a great question. It involves the issue about, understanding the cost and benefits. So you have to it's a trade-off, which is a very difficult one. So I think it's pretty important to understand the risks, to build the knowledge. It's only in this way you can make the informed decision. So that'll be very important for the governance arrangements, to understand what's happening, what's likely to happen, and you need foresight. Because AI now is a landscape, you move much faster. Like if you think of a highway, in the past you have 100 kilometers or 200 kilometers. Now it's 1,000, 20,000, depends on the speed of the development. So I think that the first important step is actually have to build a network of the stakeholders, to understand the cost and benefit risks, and also the short-term, and long-term considerations of that involve public-private partnership. So, and more specifically, you probably need to take more, concrete, measures like carrot and stick to nudge towards that. So, for example, for understanding risks, whether you want to have encourage disclosure, disclosure of CO2 emissions, water consumptions, or e-waste and other things, or you want enabling, so energy efficient enabling, as we have done before, you utilize adapt the existing tool for that, or index or verification. There could also be industry use case for verification. It's not only about cost of money. You can make money in the sense of if you build as an ethical leader in that regard and those kind of things. Or you want to think of a monitoring, forecast, and also the early warning, for example. Another thing I'm thinking also is also about the technology side, which I mentioned earlier, is that whether it's also useful to train the AI models with those kind of the green principles. So in this way, that actually even if you the prompts answer to the prompts, bear in mind those kind of the issues, and also issue like whether you are thinking of what's something you can do now, like the tendering offering requirements. So if you have a project, tender offer requirements ask for energy efficiency. So you have race to top instead of race to bottom. So there are many other things you can do. You think about whether regulate AOMs and others. Yeah. So I think a coherent approach and engage with different stakeholders and use a different tools will be very important to make that happen.
And if I can wrap up what you said, it's all about gathering the different stakeholders and using a mix of carrot and sticks. Could you maybe provide one or two examples of each in Singapore? And did the Singapore authority, maybe government, maybe governmental bodies, started to use the stick? And I mean, they use a pretty big stick when they forbidden any new data center facilities 3 years ago, but it has been lifted now. But what sort of sticks do you envision from the Singapore government, and what sort of carrots as well?
Yeah, I think that's actually, as mentioned, that you mentioned example in the government take measures about the developing some new data center. That's one example, as you mentioned. But also that Singapore has a green data center roadmap.
Okay.
So that's also been a way where they're trying to promote the water and energy efficiency, because actually if you have water consumption over a certain threshold, then you are expected, to have those kind of metering of the water usage of that. I think that's probably more things to be done because this is a very new area. So that's the reason why, as mentioned earlier, that you can think of adapting, existing tools for that instead of everything starts from scratch. So that's the issue about, when you talk about carrot and stick, energy enabling, as mentioned earlier, will be one way where you can give a reward because consumers will know what it means. Or for large language models, you have a requirement, saying telling what are the energy consumption of that. So consumers may choose which language model are more environmentally friendly. So what I try to make is that actually we have to think creatively and adapt to that. But not necessarily everything will be able to do that. One example, environment impact assessment. This is a tool which may be difficult to apply because it's time consuming and also no language models overseas. So I just want to say that you have to adapt existing one, but also think about developing new ones.
Yeah. I think the Singapore Green Data Center roadmap was mentioned earlier today by the IMDA representative, like Dr. Lawrence Wee. But it has been something that has been existing prior to the AI boom. Is it correct?
There was an earlier version. I think they call it the Green Data Center Research Roadmap.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think even back then, I think they mentioned things like the liquid cooling, but I think the latest version, which was actually launched last year, is really about pushing for accelerated adoption of various solutions. And I think that, like what Prof. Wang's mentioned, it really has to be done holistically, right? It's not just one singular solution like liquid cooling. You also need to look at the details, right? Are you still end up rejecting the heat? Are you still end up consuming a water operating the wet cooling towers? So I think the Green Data Center roadmap, the latest edition, I think it actually sort of put up a holistic kind of framework, right? So the operators, as well as the so-called partners, right, vendors, equipment vendors, and consultant, right, can really adopt a holistic mindset in terms of looking at different aspects, right, all the way from the procurement of your energy sources, right, to the adoptions of some of the latest energy efficient solutions, including liquid cooling, to possibly recovering waste and actually putting it to productive end use. So I see that as a progression. But I think probably the next step, in my view, is really to come up with the holistic green or sustainable data center standards. I think we have a different pieces, right? Including, I think one of the new standard that me together with a colleague among the audience that's developing is actually on the liquid cooling standard. But I think it's more than just liquid cooling. So I think really I look forward to Singapore showing the leadership, right, to establish a holistic standards for green or sustainable data center.
And just from my understanding, the roadmap as it is today, it's a set of best practices and things like that, but there is nothing compulsory at the moment. There is nothing sort of related to what the European Union did with the Energy Efficiency Directive. But now, if you're above a certain power capacity for your data center, you need to report wasted heat, as you mentioned, share of energy, renewables. This sort of reporting, is it already in place in Singapore or not yet?
Quite to the extent that the EU is doing, but I think what we can see is actually like IMDA and EDB is actually tying, for example, the DCCFA to, for example, the Green Data Center Roadmap, as well as the Green Mark for Data Center 2024 version. So I think it still serves the purpose of actually really compelling the industry to sort of be very intentional, as well as be very holistic in terms of assessing the different aspects that would actually lead to the more sustainable operations of the data centers.
And maybe to close this file chat, can we reverse a bit the question, and what do you see both of you as the greatest opportunity leveraging AI for sustainable purpose in Singapore?
Yeah, I just been seeing there's a lot of new ways that AI provides the possible way to deal with that. So something I'm thinking of, you can using AI to simulate. So if you have different governance or regulatory arrangements, you could have agents, and then you can think about using AI to simulate what is the outcome of that thing. So that probably will inform your decisions, and also bring the different positions of actors into that. And of course, AI will be used in allocation of the energy resources, and then even allocation of the human resources for green energy generation, so on and so forth. Yeah, so many ways that we need to explore.
And just a side question, because I didn't mention it in the introduction, but you're an expert in blockchain techniques, not like necessarily cryptocurrency, but like with blockchain use. Do you see any related use between the AI boom, which is a machine learning boom? I like to be honest, it's just a marketing trick to name it AI, and blockchain today, or for you, are they still two separate topics?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm a blockchain technology expert, but I think that actually blockchain will be, one way that nowadays we're thinking of synergize or work with the AI. So people even in the area like finance, for example, or fintech areas also looking into the AI's, more important use of that, including how do you leverage technologies to do the compliance, regulatory compliance. For example, if you have environmental regulatory requirements, whether we can use blockchain and other tools to make that happen, and AI to assist that process. So that's also be a possible way down track to explore. But we have to see what are the rules by that. For example, people may say we want regulation by design, so we require you to have the designer to build into green sustainability in your AI or similar arrangements, to make sure you're compliant with requirements.
I think what I already mentioned, you can obviously leverage on AI for the simulating performance. You can use it for optimizing the operations of the data centers. But I think the other aspect, which I think really the AI can be sort of leveraged on, is actually to orchestrate your computing, your power and cooling. Right? Currently, it's done in silo, right? But if let's suppose you are able to time the workload to match with the availability of green electrons, right? Then obviously you can actually better reduce the operational carbon. So I see AI has a lot of potential, right, in various aspects. In fact, you can even leverage on AI for the entire life cycle of the data center, all the way from design, operation to end of life.
Thanks a lot, both of you. That was the first time we record live a Green.io podcast. I hope the sound obviously will not be studio quality sound, but I hope it will be understandable. Thanks a lot to the audience for attending. It was a great exercise. And yes, let's meet next year.
Thank you for listening to this live episode from Green.io Singapore. Don't forget to share it on social media or directly with other data center practitioners. Our next episode will not be about the AI energy score. We had to postpone its recording, but with Laetitia Bournes to talk about the avoided carbon emissions thanks to digital technologies. It will be based on a study she co-authored about Vinted, the massive second-hand platform. Stay tuned. By the way, we decided to open our Slack workspace to our listeners willing to get involved in the making and the promotion of the Green.io podcast and its newsletter. The link in the show notes, and you're more than welcome to join. One last thing, visit greenio.tech to check our next conferences. New York is in 2 weeks, the lineup is a blast, and as usual, you can get a free ticket using the voucher Green.io VIP. Just make sure to have one before the 10 remaining free tickets are all gone. I'm looking forward to meeting you there to help you, fellow responsible technologists, build a greener digital world.
One bite at a time.